Hello, my name is Iris and I'm here to talk with you about how to adjust your rear derailleur and hopefully fix a lot of the problems that you may be experiencing when trying to shift gears on your bicycle. But before we get to that, let's talk about what your rear derailleur is and how it's involved in the shifting process. Your rear derailleur is this bicycle component located back here, and it's in charge of moving the chain from one sprocket to the next sprocket. And it does this by either pushing or pulling the chain in an exact amount that's determined by your shift lever up here at the front of the bike. Now there are only a few things that can go wrong with the rear derailleur that are going to cause faulty shifting. And this is hanger alignment, limit adjustments, cable tension, or that the equipment's broken and you're going to need to replace it. Before we go over how to adjust the rear derailleur and fix your shifting problems, let's get familiar with the main components that are involved in the shifting system. So it all starts with your shift lever, which is going to transfer energy through the cables to the rear derailleur. Now your rear derailleur is then going to move the chain back and forth across the sprocket cluster. These are the major components that are involved in your shifting system. The shift lever, which is going to transfer energy through the cables to the rear derailleur, moving the chain across the sprocket cluster. So let's take a closer look at these components that are involved in shifting. You have the cable, which comes in from the shift lever attaching to the rear derailleur. The rear derailleur, which is then guiding the chain across the various sprockets of the sprocket cluster, which is going to allow you to select for different gears. So there you have the main components again. The cable attaching to the derailleur, which guides the chain across various sprockets of the sprocket cluster, selecting different gears. Now let's take a look at the various components on the derailleur that allow us to make adjustments. You have your high limit screw and your low limit screw, which are going to adjust how far in or out the derailleur can move. The barrel adjuster, which we will use to make fine-tune adjustments to cable tension, and the cable fixing bolt, which is what attaches the cable to the derailleur. The derailleur also has two different pulleys that guide the chain. If we switch views, we can see there's the first pulley we're looking at, and then up a little bit above it is the second pulley. And you can see how it is really directly involved in where the chain is going to hit the sprocket cluster. Now let's take a look at what some of the common problems look like. The first one is when there's not enough cable tension to move the derailleur and the derailleur pulley to guide the chain onto the next sprocket. So you see that each shift is just not moving the pulley enough to smoothly guide the chain up to the next sprocket. And in fact, when it does move, it's going to jump two sprockets rather than one. So if we slow it down, you can watch it jump two sprockets rather than that one sprocket that it should be jumping. And this problem is going to continue across the rest of the sprocket cluster. Each time we shift, it's just not moving the pulley enough to guide the chain to the next sprocket. So the second problem we're going to look at is similar to the first in that it's involved with cable tension, but in this situation we have too much cable tension, so when we try to shift to the harder gears and the smaller sprockets, the derailleur and the derailleur pulley is not smoothly guiding that chain onto those smaller sprockets, and you see it kind of jumping up there and not resting cleanly on the sprocket. The next set of problems we're going to look at are limit adjustment problems. So in this first one, you can see that the high limit screw is not limiting the derailleur's movement to those outside sprockets, and it's actually trying to guide the chain off of the sprockets. Now when the low limit screw isn't set properly, it's even worse. You can see if we slow it down here that the derailleur is actually going into the spokes and trying to take the chain off that cassette into those spokes as well. Now that we're familiar with the components and the common problems that can occur with these components, let's talk about some of the steps that we need to follow to try to adjust the rear derailleur and fix these problems. So the first thing we're going to do is detach the cable. Then we'll adjust our high limit screw and our low limit screw. We'll reattach the cable. Then we'll adjust the cable tension across the various sprockets, check for smooth shifting to see if we have indeed fixed any of the problems we were experiencing. So the first thing that we're going to do is shift down into our smallest sprocket. Then we are going to unscrew the cable fixing bolt to release the cable or detach the cable from the rear derailleur. The next step is going to be to adjust the high limit screw. The high limit screw controls how far outboard the derailleur can move. If we tighten the limit screw, it's going to force the derailleur to move inboard. If we loosen it, it's going to allow the derailleur to move farther outboard. So you can see as I tighten it, it starts to move the derailleur and the derailleur pulley inboard, and we are actually over tightening it a little bit, and you can see how the pulley is starting to align more with that second sprocket. So you can see if we start to pedal, it's actually going to guide the chain up to that next sprocket. So we have restricted the movement of the derailleur too much, and we're going to need to loosen that high limit screw a bit to allow that derailleur to move outboard just a bit so that the chain rests nice and cleanly on that smallest sprocket. The next step is going to be to adjust the low limit screw. So as we pedal the bike, we're going to manually extend the derailleur into its most extended position. So as you can see, the derailleur is actually currently able to move into the spokes a little bit. So we're going to want to limit this. So same as with our high limit screw, as we tighten the low limit screw, it's going to restrict the movement of the derailleur, and it's going to pull the derailleur outboard. It's going to keep it from moving into the spokes. So we want to make sure that we're aligning that pulley with the largest of the sprockets, but not allowing the derailleur to go into the spokes. Now that the limit screws are adjusted, we can reattach the cable. So we want to make sure that we pull all of the cable slack out and that the cable housing is resting nicely in the barrel adjuster. And as you can see, as we screw in or screw out the barrel adjuster, it makes it a little bit longer or shorter. We're going to use that to adjust the cable tension later. Then we want to make sure that we get the cable underneath the cable fixing bolt and then tighten it down securely. We don't need to over tighten it, but we do want to make sure that it's nice and snug. Now that we've attached the cable, we're going to make our cable tension adjustments to make sure that the derailleur pulley is smoothly aligning with the sprockets and guiding the chain where it needs to go. So to do this, we're going to shift through our first few sprockets and keep an eye out for how the pulley is aligning the chain with those sprockets. So we saw there that the chain really wasn't moving smoothly to the smaller sprockets. To correct this, we're going to screw in the barrel adjuster just a little bit and reduce that cable tension. So I'm going to check to see what effect this had. So we see that the pulley still isn't correctly aligning the chain to that smaller sprocket. So we're going to reduce the cable tension a little bit more by tightening the barrel adjuster, and then watch how the pulley is aligning the chain to that sprocket. So we see this seems to fix it. It's a lot smoother. The pulley is nicely aligning the chain with the corresponding sprocket for each shift. So now that we've got that corrected, we're going to move up to our larger sprockets and see how the pulley is aligning with those sprockets. See if the pulley is getting the chain to the correct sprocket nice and smoothly. So we'll shift to our largest sprocket and then downshift and keep an eye on that. So again, we see sort of the same problem we were having with our smaller sprockets, that the pulley isn't really guiding the chain smoothly onto those smaller sprockets. So we're going to reduce the cable tension just a little bit more and then check to see if that fixed that problem. So shifting to our largest sprocket again, and then when we downshift, we see that the pulley seems to be smoothly aligning the chain with those sprockets. Now the last thing to do is check for smooth shifting across the entire sprocket cluster. So to do this, we're just going to shift through all of our gears, moving the chain across the entire sprocket cluster range, and really keeping an eye on how the pulley is lining the chain up with those sprocket clusters. Does everything look nice, smooth, crisp, and quick? And it does look like we have successfully adjusted our rear derailleur's cable tension to make sure that the chain is landing on a sprocket nicely. Now you know how to adjust your rear derailleur and fix some of the common problems that may occur when you're shifting through the gears of your bicycle. But more importantly, now you know how the ability to shift through your gears is due to a system of interrelated components. Starting with your shift lever and moving through the derailleur cable back to the rear derailleur, where movement in the shift lever is translated to movement in the rear derailleur that moves the chain from one sprocket to the next sprocket. We can fine-tune this movement with the barrel adjuster, and we can limit how far the derailleur can move in or how far the derailleur can move out with our limit screws. Now you know how and why you can shift the gears of your bicycle. Now you can have a great ride and not have to worry about having any kind of shifting problems.